Hi, I'm Gina, creator and host of Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that is designed to have real talk around all things midlife and strategies to help us live a more vibrant second half. It is my deepest desire to help other people shift the conversation toward empowerment, toward vibrancy, toward excitement about what life has for us and what we can bring to the world, how we can each individually shine our light. So I invite you to grab a cup of something wonderful, to join me each week or when you can, and join me in my living room to have these conversations. And if you are enjoying this, please take the time to subscribe wherever you listen, rate my podcast, and share the episodes that help you, the episodes that encourage you. Let's build this community together. Welcome to my tribe. I'm so grateful you're here. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and to live a more vibrant second half. Today, my guest has created a practical roadmap for recovering an extra 15% of your time. Who doesn't want that? She can help us discover how to collect our one-day refund and learn strategies for our newly discovered time, how to use it more wisely, enhance our life. Today, my guest is Donna McGeorge. She's a productivity coach. She's the author of One Day Refund, Take Back Time, Spend It Wisely. Donna, thank you so much for being with me today.
Having me, Gina. I'm delighted to be here.
I know you're traveling, so thank you so much for making time in your travels. Listen, I would love to jump right in and find out, what is it about productivity? Why is that your passion?
Do you know, I'm not sure where it really started. I'm going to guess I was raised by a military dad, and I think that just the structure and order of military life, we had lots of little sayings in our house. So my dad was in the Navy. And so we would always, he would say things like, you're always heading for a ship that's sailing, or, you know, better to be an hour early than 5 minutes late. And my favorite of all time was, well, it's a long swim home if you miss the boat. So I think that kind of created for me a natural sense of order and getting things done. And then, of course, through my career, I was always that person that, you know, I was the person you'd always give the job to. I could get stuff done. I was, you know, punctual, organized. And then, you know, just in the second half of my life, I started writing about it. And here we are.
Oh, that's amazing. I like that. It's an awfully long swim. I've never heard that one before. I'm like, I wish I'd have had that one. That's a good one. So tell me a little bit about your book. Now, you were talking off record about a series of books. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I spend a lot of time working with people who have jobs and are having to balance and manage their busy lives. And so the stories, I listen to the stories they tell me about what are the things that are bothering them or hampering their ability to do what they need to do. And the things that they tell me about were, we spend all day at work in back-to-back horrible meetings. We can't, our days are unstructured, and we just feel like we're overwhelmed all the time. And so the first book in the series was about meetings. It's called The 25-Minute Meeting, How to Do them more efficiently. The second book was called The First 2 Hours, which is about how you structure your day according to the clock in your body, not the clock on the wall. And this third book is The One Day Refund, is about strategies to have more thinking, breathing, living and working space, how to manage our capacity better.
I'd love to hear more about that idea of creating more breathing space in our life, because as women, we often carry several things, the roles of wife, mother, maybe business owner, or working in an office, maybe being someone's admin assistant, maybe even running the business. And there's a lot of plates we need to spin. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that metaphor is such a good one about the spinning plates. because I do sometimes feel like we're running, particularly as women, and I know it's not all women and not all men, that's the kind of the disclaimer, but I do know for women, they're spinning a plate. If they are having a job or running a business, they got that plate spinning, and that in and of itself could have half a dozen plates hanging over there with the work, and then they've got the plates that they have to manage at home, and I just kind of feel like no sooner do you get one spinning and one starts to kind of topple, right? It's such a great metaphor. And I think there's so much more demand on women generally to not only manage their jobs, etc., but what I refer to as personal admin, the life admin, the expectation that in addition to doing your job, you've also got to make sure that you remember grandma's birthday and cousin Johnny's bar mitzvah and all that sort of stuff to make sure that we're on top of that. And I often tell the story about, my dad's great, like no problem with that, but he never knows what anyone's getting for Christmas because he never has to manage any of that stuff, right? It's always a big joke, around you get your Christmas present from mum and dad and you say, hey, Dad, what's here? And he'd have no idea what's in it because mum handles all that stuff, pays all the personal bills. It's like magic, right? It's like a magic laundry basket you were telling me about too before we got started.
I'll fill that story in. So my husband was at work and there were like 3 guys and 1 woman. And somehow it came up how the woman takes care of everything. And my husband said, oh, you mean like when I throw my dirty laundry in the hamper and it comes out clean, like magic? And she said, yes. And I turned and looked at him and said, oh, so what you're saying is I'm magic. So now, honestly, yesterday I did something and I looked at him and he goes, magic.
But I reckon that's what it can feel like. And certainly maybe not so much for all our husbands, but certainly for kids. I don't know that they make that conscious connection that they just dump stuff on a floor and then magically it's organized again in their world. But this is what contributes to women feeling, I think, sometimes a little overwhelmed, a little out of control, and sometimes at risk of failing at the important things, which is why I write about this idea of breathing space and how we have to figure out how we can give ourselves more of that so we can show up as our best self. Because we've all had the experience of, not being our best selves where we might snap where we shouldn't have. And we all know that if you've had to apologize later, that's one of those moments where things just got all on top of us. And so that's what I love to do, help people be able to create a little bit more of that space.
What does it look like to create a little more space? Because I'm not sure that women will identify very quickly where they can even find the idea of space.
Sure. So the 3 aspects when it comes to breathing space is to disengage, disconnect, and devote. And so the first thing we need to do is figure out where in our world is energy being sucked from us. Now, sometimes it's relationships. So it can be friendships. Sometimes it's family. That makes it a bit tricky. But it's when you think about the people who you're spending the most amount of time with, which ones are the ones that create energy when you're together? It's fantastic. I had one of those last night. I'm out with a friend and I was very tired when I got there after a busy day, but so energized and pumped afterwards because there's an energy creation there. Whereas others you might go out with, you start out energetic and the end of it, you go, oh my God, that's exhausting. And so we want to do a little bit of a relationship audit or a people we're spending time with audit just to get a sense of where we might be able to make some changes. Now, it sounds a bit, a bit harsh to say it might be time to break up some relationships. Maybe some of the people, activities, things that we're doing are not giving us the energy and it might be time to stop them. So, I know some women they're working, they're running the household, they're on committees, they're on the local soccer committee, they're also part of their church, and they've got so much going on that my question is, you're not doing any of those really well. You're kind of doing all of them at a fraction of yourself. What would happen if you let a couple of those go so you actually had the space to do them better and enjoy those things? And anytime I hear a woman say to me, oh, I have to take the kids to sport or I have to go do this, I'm like, do you have to or are you choosing to? Because the challenge is if you have to, I'm going to say, well, how could you get some help around that? How might you carpool with some other families? How might you have a roster where you don't have to go every weekend? And I said that to one mother, and she said, oh, but I like going. And I said, okay, then we need to change your language, because even that can shift your energy to go from I have to take the kids to sport to I choose to take the kids to sport because I enjoy it. That just shifts your energy a bit, because that says you're in control of your space. So disengaging from the things, activities, people that just don't bring you joy, that don't fill you with energy. That's one thing I do. Now I'll just pause for response because I've got lots to say on this.
No, I love the idea of that disengagement. I think for some people, we do disengage in midlife because we're kind of over.
Yeah.
You know, there's a little bit of that, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. But I like the piece of it that, in my mind, the way I'm interpreting what you're saying is you're doing it for joy. It's not coming from a negative space. It's literally saying, this is the life I have. What's serving it now? What's not serving it now? And making that choice again from the joy standpoint, and not like, oh, I'm just so over. You know, we could dramatize something, but I love removing that negative emotion and just saying, really, what is my bandwidth and what brings me joy? And that's the deciding factor. I like that.
It really is. I'm a huge fan of this notion of a life by design, and it probably is a factor of being in second half, if you want to call it that. I'm 55, so you know, maybe there's a privilege aspect of this that I can look back and go, oh, I'm just so over all that rubbish. Nobody's got time for that. I only want to do the things that fill me with joy, fill me with energy, and are part of my life by design. And I think one of my primary drivers is this word choice, is that I choose. I say who, I say when, I say why, I say where, I say what. And I'm actually more okay now in this part of my life than I've ever been before about saying no, and without the need to justify or explain. I mean, I'm polite about it, but I think if people talk about FOMO, the fear of missing out, I'm a huge fan and advocate of JOMO, the joy of missing out. You know, like back when we were kids and there was a party and we didn't get invited, we'd be horrified. Now it's like we were invited to a party, then it gets cancelled. We're like, yay, stay at home in our jammies. Yes.
I'm so there with you. I'm like, oh, a party. Do I have to go? It's so true. But I love that JOMO, the joy of missing out. So as we disengage, was the second step disconnect?
Disconnect. And look, again, it depends on your level of connect. And I mean disconnecting from technology, I sometimes think, and I fall into this category myself, I think, oh, gee, I wish I had more time. And then all I've got to do is go look at my phone and see how many hours I spent scrolling on social media or whatever. And so I quite like, there's a Hebrew tradition or I don't know whether it's a rule or whatever. It's called a tek Shabbat or a Shabbat. So at sundown on a Friday through to sundown on a Saturday. Now, by the way, I'm not Jewish. I just love this principle. I'm stealing it from the Hebrew world, where you don't interact with any kind of technology. And that's not even driving cars or anything like that. So I'm not quite suggesting that, but I am suggesting, what would that look like for you? What would it be like for a family, for an individual or for a family to say, hey, from 5 o'clock on a Friday night, we're just putting our devices away, because we're so connected to everything. And this is another aspect of, particularly for women, that not only have we got the world, we're constantly on our phones or checking or having messages or being texted or being interacted with. I'm like, what would happen if you just turned that off for a 24-hour period? Now, I know that might make some people quite alarmed. Oh, I could never do that. Like, what if there's an emergency? And I'm like, well, we're all of an age. I think your tribe is all of an age where we can remember a time when we didn't have 24/7 connectivity and emergencies happened and people still got hold of us. People still managed to find us. And so I think we've become a little bit addicted. Well, I know we've become addicted to this idea of constantly being connected. So whether it's from phones or whether it's even just from the world, you know, what would happen if you just disconnected for 24 hours a week, where you didn't constantly interact with stuff? whatever that stuff is for you. Now, for most of us, the technology. So I say, give yourself a break.
Mm. And there's so much brain science behind that. That is actually legitimately something that our brains need a break, because when our eyes are open, information is coming in, whether we're aware of it or not. And then we pile on top of that what we're hearing through music, movies, what we're seeing, what we're processing when we see the pictures. There's so much happening in our brain. It really is overload. And in that disconnect, it feels scary. I'm going to agree with you. I tend to turn my phone off once everyone's home.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that makes sense. And I'm going to say, do whatever you need to do around that. And it might not be straight up, you're going to do it for 24 hours. It might just be, how long can I not pick up my phone? Studies are saying that it's about 7 minutes before people, you and I are having a chat, and 7 minutes into it, I get the urge to check my phone. That's apparently, now I don't have that, but that's apparently what the research says. So you're watching telly, you're watching a really great movie or your favorite TV show, about 7 minutes into it, you'll get the urge to pick up your phone. That's what they're saying. And so I say it's an opportunity to go challenge accepted. How long can I go without the urge to check or to connect into the world? But the brain science around this is fascinating. I've just become very interested in the state of boredom, and I've been doing a lot of reading around what does boredom really mean and why do we feel bored. And it's addiction to activity. And so the moment we stop doing something, we feel a state of, we feel it as boredom, and it's actually restlessness. And it's actually our dopamine need for a dopamine hit. So it's an addiction that says I need to be doing something active. And so when I say to people, hey, could you just sit for an hour a day in silence and do nothing? You're allowed to go for a walk. Could you go for a walk, but not listen to a podcast, right? Actually take a break, and just listen to nature and not even take your phone with you. Oh, right. And then I've had people say, oh, but I'd be bored. And I'm like, great. You need to extend boredom. So boredom and that restlessness that you feel is actually a sign that you need a break, and you need to extend your tolerance for non-activity. It's very interesting.
It's interesting when you do take a walk and you just allow yourself to be in the moment of what's going on around you. If you can get a little more away from cars, get a little bit more into nature, it's amazing how restorative that is.
Yeah, there's two aspects. So I'm fortunate to live in a part of Australia that is close to beaches and waterways. And so if you can get near water, that's restorative. And in Japan, I can't remember the Japanese word for it, but they refer to something called tree bathing. I don't remember the actual Japanese word for it right now, but the literal translation is tree bathing. And it's getting in nature and allowing the trees and the nature to kind of wash over you. And it's very, very restorative. It's so great for the psyche and your sense of well-being. Can't recommend it enough.
I think when the restlessness hits, if we could train ourselves to do the movement, like go take a walk, get near, like you said, get your feet in the grass, feet in the sand. Water is always fantastic. But if you're inland, like I am, maybe the mountains or nature path or something it's still like you, I love that tree bath. I totally feel that. And sometimes I crave it, it's like, I need to get out there. It's like, I know that that's what my body needs. And if you can breathe a little and slow the brain down, because really I'm thinking about this idea of getting some time back. I think if we could organize our mental space as well, that would be a little bit of a time saver instead of spinning all the time.
Well, yeah. So there's a couple of things here. So the third D in this is devote. And it's about where do you want to devote your time to get a better return, and devoting your time and energy to things that give you that joy, that glorious feeling and so it's whatever self-care means to you, but it could be tree bathing, it could be swimming, actually bathing in the ocean, whatever it might be. But there is, the studies around our brain waves, right? So we have several layers of brain waves. If you hooked us up to a machine, you'd see our alpha, our beta, alpha, theta, and delta brain waves and what's active. And when we're constantly using our beta brain waves, this is when we're on very high frequency, constantly our brain jumping around, spinning, as you said. And while we're in that space, we're probably producing a little bit too much cortisol and adrenaline in the system, which has a degrading effect overall if we're doing too much. It's bad for our health. Alpha brain waves are glorious brain waves. They're the ones that happen when you're daydreaming or when you're in flow or when you're doing your hobby. So if you're out tree bathing or if you're walking on a nature path, or for me, if I'm walking along a beach and you completely lose track of time, and those alpha brain waves, they're restorative. That's why it's restorative, because the brain gets a break. It's like it has a chance to actually breathe. And that's where creativity lives. And so our ability to solve problems. Now, this might be too much information, but I'll just go with it. My husband refers to our bathtub as the Starship Enterprise because he knows when I get into it, it doesn't matter if there's a decaying orbit, we've got no dilithium crystals, there's Klingons on the starboard bow, the whole world's collapsing, but I get in that bath and I get into an alpha brainwave state, I can solve any problem in that moment because I'm giving my brain the space to think, quite literally, to think and breathe. I read an interesting thing recently, a guy called David Allen, he's another productivity person, and he quoted, his quote is, "The human brain is for having ideas, not storing them." And that blew my mind when I realized how much we carry in our heads. And of course, we're going to, when it comes time to actually need to solve a problem or deal with a situation, we feel that I've got no space to think. Well, because we're carrying so much. So I can't stress more. This is a very easy tip for most of us, is you should wipe your mind every morning. Get up every morning and write down everything that's on your mind. Get it out of your head, out down through the out through the head, down through the arm, out through the pen, onto the paper. Write down everything, not just to-do list, just what's on your mind. Because once the brain sees that it's registered somehow on a piece of paper, there's this weird, it's magic, this weird thing that happens that it kind of releases the need to hold on to it. Yeah, it's fascinating.
So a good old-fashioned brain dump.
That's it, brain dump. Even Einstein knew the value of this. There's a great story that says that he was in a class once and a student tried a gotcha moment and, said, "Hey, professor, what's the formula for blah, blah, blah?" And Einstein said, "I don't know." And words to that effect. And the student said, "I thought you were meant to be the smartest person on the planet." And he said, I don't bother myself remembering things that are easily found in a book. And I'm like, that's it. Why do I have to remember everything? These days we can look up stuff. We shouldn't have to. You should have for all your family birthdays, get them into some kind of calendar system, right? Because you shouldn't have to hold on to that stuff. So wiping our mind, doing a brain dump, getting it all out, writing it to the point that your brain, you literally say to yourself, "Anything else in there?" And the little quiet voice says, "Oh, I think we're good. Right? I think we're done." That's so powerful and so therapeutic to clear your brain out.
Do you think that there's the potential for some people getting value in being the one that remembers everything? Like if their identity is attached to that, there may be a little faith walk to release a little bit of that and allow themselves to have the brain space.
Well, I kind of say that if your life is perfect and holding on to that stuff and being the repository of all the memories, holding on to that stuff, if your life is good and you're not complaining about it and you're not overwhelmed and life is amazing, keep doing it, right? Because if it serves you, keep doing it. If, however, you are finding that you're overwhelmed and the strain of that and the pressure and the demand of that is too much, then maybe you do need to let it go, and you do need to think about this idea of what aspect of my identity is being fed by that. Is it control? Is it power? Is it the desire to be needed? Is it that finally that's my one thing that I do because that helps me feel like I'm contributing in some way? Then my question would be, are there other ways you can do that? And I think you can still be the repository of all things, but you could just write it down. you can just have a little notebook in your purse that just when someone says, when's Uncle Bob's birthday, you can go, I know that, just look it up. Don't have to actually remember it, right? I'm a list person. I have lists everywhere. And because I get divine inspiration a lot, I'll be walking down the street and suddenly think of 3 gifts that I know my mum would love. And so I'll make a note of those. So I don't have to remember them. I'll just make a note so that when birthday time comes around, I've got a list of 4 or 5 options for mum's birthday or for my daughter or for something like that. So I write stuff down or I use the little list thing on my phone to capture those things so I can remember. But the other thing I read recently also was around what happens when someone is widowed and when when they've abdicated responsibility for memory to the other partner. And so suddenly the mum or dad that you might be helping, and I'm trying to manage my parents around this at the moment, that I'll say to mum, what's the password for something? And she goes, oh, your father knows all of that. Or what's do you know your PIN number for this? Do you know how to get into your bank details? I know dad handles all of that. And it's like, wow, and the opposite happens. So I might say to dad, hey, how do you run your washing machine? Oh, your mum handles all of that. So when one partner goes, suddenly there's a real sense of helplessness because all of that memory stuff has been abdicated to others. So there's some real work to be done around this, I think, particularly for women to just check who's responsible for what, and maybe it's not that useful for you to own all of that or for your partner to own all of that. And secondly, just write stuff down. Get yourself a fancy little notebook. I love stationery shopping. Get yourself a little notebook.
So, you're talking about that 1-day refund, and I'd like to know, what is it? Is that 1-day refund that 24-hour break, or what is the 1-day refund in your book? Right.
So it's on a 7-day week. It's based on the 15% rule. On a 7-day week, 15% is a day, 8 hours-ish, something 7.8 hours or something like that. And so how I work it is, it really depends on your world. And this is not a full day off to, if I'm working, I'm not suggesting that we goof off for that whole day. It's just a day for me. So any of your listeners that have a job in any kind of corporate setting, if I say to you, a meeting gets cancelled at the last minute, how do you feel? Most times people go, oh, so much relief, right? Because they get that whole hour back. And it's the same thing, for those who don't have a job or maybe have lots of social engagements. If something gets cancelled on a weekend, kids' soccer gets cancelled because of the rain or something, the whole family goes, oh, what a relief. We don't have all this time to ourselves. That's the energy I'm trying to create here, that feeling like I have a whole bit of time and I get to choose what I do. If I said to you, what would you do if you had a whole extra day in your week? You'd probably say to me things like my hobbies, spend time with my kids, the things that energize me, read books, maybe sleep, right? Whatever. So I'm saying that's what you want to protect some time for. Mm-hmm. And so so you can apply the 15% rule to a day. It's about 1.2 hours. So do I just protect, if I'm working in an office, I might have a meeting with myself and I can look forward to that all day. I know I've got that hour protected where I get to just have that for myself. If I'm a parent, it might be that I just try to protect an hour every day. I reckon that just before people get home from work or home from school, that's a magical hour. That hour, it's kind of like the calm before the storm, even. So just protect that. You can do whatever you like. You don't have to kind of have a sleep or anything like that. It's just whatever you want to do. Now, some people prefer to have it a bit larger chunk of time. So over a working week, it's 6 hours. So if I'm in an office, do I just protect 6 hours? Maybe I protect, say, from, 11 o'clock on a Friday. So I don't do any meetings. I just protect that time for myself. If you are wanting that larger block of time, maybe over a weekend, you make some arrangements where maybe the kids go off and do their thing and you get some space to yourself. Or it might be that you take yourself off on over a month. You might take yourself off for a couple of days break, or every quarter, which is one thing I do. Once a quarter, I take myself off for a 3-day retreat where I go and just think about nothing, sit on the beach, whatever. So over a year, it's 7.8 weeks. I know that sounds really precise, but I've had to do the maths because people say, what's the 15% rule about? And a lot of you'd be saying, oh, you're dreaming. I'd never be able to take a 7.8-week break. But plenty of people do. Lots of academics do it. They take sabbaticals where they just go and do research or dream about stuff that they want to dream about. So it's really up to you and your life around how might you get a 15% buffer built in so that you can, I don't know, just feel like that you've got a little bit more space in your world that's yours to control.
I would think that one of the outcomes of that would be really knowing yourself better too.
Yeah, it kind of starts with that, so there's no rules here. We're all such gloriously unique human beings and human souls that, I can produce a book and say, here's a bunch of suggestions in there. And they're kind of based on about, I don't know, 90% of circumstances if you want to do it that, but there are no hard and fast rules. So step one is always a bit of know thyself, right? So you can try this stuff. You can try anything from any book. But if your life circumstances are such that they don't quite fit, you've really got to know yourself and know what to tweak and where the change is needed before you can figure out what's the right change for you. So totally agree. Despite the fact that I write books and I'd love everyone to buy them and read them, I get that we're unique human souls and not everything is applicable to everyone.
What's helpful about resources like the one that you're providing is sometimes we don't know where to start. Like it might seem obvious. It might even actually be simple in the big picture, but changing our habits and shifting the way we spend our time and the way we use our energy takes work. Some of it starts with, from my experience as a coach, helping people shift the way they think. Because if we think we don't have the time, we don't see the time. There's a direct correlation to what we believe, and I'm using quotes, which no one but you can see, and what is, again, air quotes, truth, right? We think we don't have it. We don't see it. Whereas if we can shift to the possibility and the curiosity about time, right? Then we have, our brain goes, oh, on Thursday, remember this got canceled. Your brain actually begins to look for, it's the reticular activating system. Yes. You tell it what to look for. You tell it
and it'll
not to look for it. Yeah, it will find it, but it also won't find it if you tell it isn't there.
A relationship with time is quite interesting for me around what constitutes plenty of time or not enough time. So the best way to answer this is, you've got you're going to the airport to jump on an airplane, say it leaves at 9:00. What is plenty of time to be at the airport? So some people have to be there 2 hours beforehand to feel anything inside of that. Now I'm anxious, right? So even our relationship to how we view what is plenty of time versus not enough time, and that's just a construct, right? That we do in our heads. And so you're absolutely right. When we shift how we think about time and how we view it, that in and of itself can create tremendous results. Because sometimes a 5-minute break is plenty. The deep breathing you could do in a 5-minute break to get your state back into some kind of, if you're feeling stressed, to get your state back into some level of equilibrium. 5 minutes is plenty of time to do that, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like snacks, right? These are your snacks through the day.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a whole meal. It doesn't have to be a smorgasbord. You can actually take snacks. But I think what I hear you saying is those are the maintenance moments, but we still probably need to create a greater space of breathing room because our brain still knows this is a 5-minute break versus this is 5 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think the simple things I'm going to say are things like do the wipe the mind or the brain dump exercises. I don't think we're very good at asking for help. I talk about delegating in my book, which is often a word that's just say it seems to be in the realms of corporate, but I actually think how it manifests in our private life is by saying, I just need some help. and I need some other people to do some of these other tasks for me, whether it is take the kids to sport, or whether it is saying, I can't be on this committee anymore, or I'm going to need help being on this committee, or my life admin stuff. I don't think we're very good at that. And I think it could come from a guilt place. Who knows? I should be, this notion in our heads, I should be able to manage all of this. Other people do it. Why can't I? And I'm here to tell you, people say I should be able to because others can. Hardly anyone is coping with the kind of load that we have to deal with these days.
Right.
Like if you think people are cruising, then they're not. And comparing yourself to others, what a mistake. It's like, so I do think this idea of asking for help and genuinely sitting down with families and saying, I can't carry this load anymore, I'm going to need some help. I think that's a huge one, particularly for women.
Mm-hmm. And removing the feeling that we're failing somehow for needing help.
I'm going to actually flip that completely and say that actually it's a sign that you're succeeding, that you're recognizing that you can't manage it all on your own, because the end game of, if I view it as, unless I'm doing everything, I'm not successful, eventually you'll fail at just about everything, right? And so in order to continue being successful, I am going to have to get some help and support. And now there are some people who might be listening that I'm going to say, you could outsource stuff. I'm sure you have them in the US. And here in Australia, we've got services like HelloFresh that they don't cook the food for you. They just basically, they take away what I refer to as the decision fatigue. So, most women would know this. You get to the end of a busy day, you come into the house after work or whatever you've been doing, and someone in the family says, what's for dinner? And you just nearly lose it, right? Because that's just one more decision that you just don't want to have to make. And so any of those services where they say, here's a week's worth of meals and here's a week's worth of fresh ingredients. So you don't have to remember. When someone says, what's for dinner? You say, I don't know, it's on the fridge. Go and have a look at the little HelloFresh thing. And it'll tell you what we're having this week. So anything we can do that we can outsource decision making is great. And this is, my hubby and I, because I make a lot of decisions based in my business. So we have favorite restaurants where he can order for me if I've had a big week, because sometimes I can have such a big week where I can't even think about what I want to eat. I know that sounds very privileged to say that I've got, and it sounds, I don't know. I don't think it's weak. I think it's just, I recognize in myself that I need that help sometimes. And yeah, he'll say, yep, fine, I'll order for you. You don't have to think about it.
That could feel so luxurious, really, letting go of a couple of decisions, huh?
Yeah. But just the fact that we think of it as luxurious, I'd be wallowing in that. Like, I didn't have to make decisions about that. I'd be so wallowing in the glory of that. That's the JOMO, right?
Yeah.
The joy of not having to make that decision. Yeah, I love it.
That kind of leads me to the thought that there are probably, back to the disengage, there's probably some decisions we're making that maybe that element of life, not just the decision itself, but that thing might need to be disengaged from. Like Joyce, you were talking about activities or our own expectations or whatever, just disengaging from things that put us in a constant state of decision fatigue.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things to say to people when I'm coaching people is, what could you do today that your future self would thank you for? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's decisions. There's a decision you can make today that means there's 100 decisions you don't have to make further down the track. And that can be, a very simple example of this is, I'm going to decide today to rip out a bunch of stuff from my wardrobe that, over the last 2 years, during varying phases of lockdown, I'm not going to ever get back into those clothes again. We've moved on for that. I'm going to rip all that stuff out, which then creates space. So that removes the amount of decisions I have to deal with around even just what I'm going to wear. And so things like meal planning is another great example of that. I do meal planning, make some decisions on one day, which means my future self doesn't have to make a bunch of decisions on other days. And so any decision you can make today, that means, and so a decision like, I'm giving up a particular committee. I'm going to stop doing that. I'm not going to be on the church fundraiser this year. Mm-hmm. That making that decision, that's okay. And now suddenly, oh my goodness, there's a whole bunch of decisions I've now just let go of, and now I have space free. Mm-hmm. So what could you do today that your future self will thank you for? that's a great way to think about this.
I always think about the idea that, let's think of a job, for example. We feel so obligated to jump through every hoop and do everything and be everything and do extra to protect our job. But if we were to drop dead tomorrow, how long would it take them to replace us?
Well, no one can see me, but I'm snapping my finger. Can you hear me snap my finger at that? They do. This is a really interesting thing around work and why we work. So I think we've got to put our work into perspective. So what you're just describing there is someone who hasn't put their work into perspective. I work, go hard, and then forget that the reason I do this job, that it's meant to be a means goal to another end. So it's a means to an end. It's, the idea that I earn a living, I do that so I can have a life. And so the very reason that we do the job, look after my family, have money for special things, maybe go on vacations, whatever it is, the reason I have that job and earn that money is for this life. We forget that, and suddenly the job becomes the end, and we've lost sight of it. So you should be once a year do an interview with yourself at very least, and ask yourself questions around why this job, why now, what am I bringing to it, what do I get from it, what am I learning, how is it supporting me, how is it supporting my bigger picture of life, where is it in my journey of life, to just keep it in perspective. Because I reckon when a job is in perspective, when your work is in perspective, you can nearly do any rubbish job if you can, and it takes all the sting and the energy out of hating my job or not liking my job or feeling stressed by my job if you know why you're doing it. Why your purpose, where it sits, where the perspective is for you, because it means I can show up and do this because I got more important and more wonderful things in my life happening that this job is supporting. It's not the thing. It's just part of the wider perspective of my world.
I love the phrase that you used, where it sits in my life. I think that could itself be a good evaluation question with anything, any relationship. Where does this sit in my life? What does it require of me? Do I have that to give, or do I choose to give or not to give? That's a very powerful position. And I think that's actually the underlying thing to your message, is that we do have power in our lives that maybe we're not recognizing.
I would fully agree with that. And again, it may come with, as we get older, we've got a bit more perspective. So when you're 55 and you look back, I've got 55 years of experience to look back on. I've probably got the ability to have more personal power because I look back on that and go, yeah, I can make better choices now based on my experience. It's, I'm watching my daughter at 30 doing the struggle that 30-year-old women struggle with, as she's, buying houses and juggling family and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, you'll be right. Promise me you'll be fine, right? Because we get to a point where we see where does what I'm doing now sit in my life, in the perspective of even my past, not necessarily even my future. It's like, this is just a blip. Really interesting comparison. Someone said to me, when a 2-year-old absolutely loses it, like has a massive temper tantrum because they've dropped their ice cream or their balloon flew away. And the temptation for the adult is to say, calm down, it's just a balloon or just an ice cream, right? And you feel like that reaction is totally out of control or
out of proportion to the actual.
Out of proportion. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. But actually, in that little person's life, that is actually the worst thing that's ever happened to them in their little life, is that they've lost the balloon. And so when you think of that, you think, of course they're going to lose it, because in their little life, it's the worst thing that happened. And so when you get to 55, of course a balloon's nothing, because we've had so many other things that put various other bits into perspective for us. And a job, our work, it shouldn't be the be all and end all. I don't think anyway. It shouldn't be the be all and end all. It should be part of a bigger picture.
I think it's really important to figure that piece out, because I have heard of people who maybe had very good paying jobs, but they really were unhappy. And what they did was they evaluated their lives, shifted to a lesser paying job, but put more joy in their bank account, if you will, and found a way to structure around the joy. because that's a lot of years of our lives that we give to something. I think it takes work and creativity, but it's probably more possible than we realize in some circumstances.
Yeah, I think I think we gear our lives interestingly. So the more money we get, the more we gear our lives. And I know for me, running my own business, my world's fluctuated from a financial perspective. And I'm always quite surprised at how little I can live on when I have to. And I think you adjust. And I hear stories like that all the time. I've got friends who have done that. They'll say, I'm taking a new job, it's less money and more. So the actual, I don't know, the equation, whatever currency they're counting. So cash is just one aspect of currency. As you say, there's more joy, there's more learning, there's more opportunity, there's more, it's closer to home or whatever it might be. And that's a currency that we need to take into account as well.
That's a wonderful phrase. Cash is just one kind of currency.
Mm.
It's almost like we step back and we're putting everything on the same level.
Mm.
And we're figuring out what's the value of this? What's the value of that? There's no perfect life, but getting to the life that feels more in alignment or feels that more joy. But just thinking about looking at the timeline of our life or the activities in our life and the relationships in our life, I love the idea of looking at everything as currency, because we do use that term, right? How do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to spend my time with? What do I want to spend my money on? Oh, I have an hour. What do I want to spend my time doing? So spend is a word we use all the time. So if we stepped it a little bigger and said currency, wow, that really puts a different context. I think it takes some of the emotion away from some of the decisions, because you're really looking at it from a more practical standpoint on some level. But that's how my mind is working through that thought. But I would love to have you share 3 kind of takeaways that you really want people to anchor into, because we've really danced around a lot of topics. I know your book is obviously a fantastic resource that people can reach out for. But outside of your book, which please, by all means, go grab a copy, what 3 things would you encourage people to anchor into?
The first thing is that you don't have to be 100% on 100% of the time, that we can stop. And so I know this sounds very simple, but one of my biggest tips is just stop and sit and breathe and just take stock of where you're at. So if I said stop is tip number 1, if you just did that, great. Just stop. And whether you say it's a snack of a 5-minute stop, or whether it's an hour or a day, we've just got to stop, or at the very least slow down, right? We've got to slow down. Then the second thing I'll say is the taking stock, which is kind of what we've been talking about for the last part of this conversation. You just take stock of where I'm at. And, a lot of people talk about gratitude around, for everything that is making us crazy. Often the very things that are making us crazy, the very gorgeous things in our lives, the great relationships, our families, we have jobs, all those sorts of things. So just take stock of where you're at and, put it into perspective, into a wider perspective. And then the thing I mentioned earlier is I can't stress enough the idea of doing things today that your future self will thank you for. And it's little things like, if you have a job, it's making sure that you've put your vacation request in so that you get to have the vacation time when you want it. Or it's, protecting time for yourself. And so the kinds of things that we can do that our future self would thank you for can be even something like sending yourself a bunch of flowers for some random day in September. Pick a day that's not at all significant or anything that you'll probably forget. Schedule it and set and forget. And then one day in September, a bunch of flowers is going to turn up at your door with a note from you that says, hey, you got this. I'm so proud of you. You're doing so well. And like your future self will thank you for that, right? But it could be flowers, could be anything. I know for me, when it comes to doing things my future self will thank me for, I'm looking at my activity horizon for about 2 to 4 weeks. And it's around, what have I got coming up in the next 2 to 4 weeks? What are some things I can do today that will make the next 2 to 4 weeks just be that much easier? So that would be my 3 things. Stop, take stock or put things into perspective, and to be thinking about what you could do now that your future self would thank you for.
Oh, those are so great. Donna, how can people find you in your book?
Well, first of all, I'm a shameless self-promoter on social media. So you'll find me on all good social media platforms. Donna McGeorge is an unusual name, so you'll find me fairly easily with that. And I do have a website, donnamcgeorge.com, with a donnamcgeorge.com/shop, which is where my books sit. And all my books are on all the good platforms, Amazon, and I think even some of your bricks and mortar bookstores might even carry them now in the US, which is very exciting.
That is exciting. Well, Donna, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your obviously busy schedule since you're traveling and talking to me from a hotel. But I have so enjoyed this conversation. What a practical, encouraging conversation this has been. The information that you've brought is so actionable and helpful. And I know it's going to help everyone who hears it. So I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing these things with us today.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Gina. Really lovely to have met you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Today, friends, you've been listening to Donna McGeorge. She's a productivity coach and the author of One Day Refund, Take Back Time, Spend It Wisely. And if you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 272, you will find links to Donna there. And while you're there, please leave your name and email address. I send out periodic encouraging emails. Friends, this is one of those conversations that may strike a chord of, I know I should do that, but consider this your sign that you shouldn't do it, that you will do it. You're going to shift from should to will and make those little shifts in your life to create space for yourself. Lower your cortisol, raise your dopamine, take care of yourself, enjoy the one life you've been given in a way that feels really good to you, and find out that you can actually make that time and make your life feel so much richer. Chase that joy in any way that you can, my friends. Thank you for listening to this today. And if you enjoyed it, please take the time to comment, rate, share this podcast with your friends. We can all use a little bit of encouragement and reminder that we get to choose how we live our lives. Thank you for being here. We look forward to sharing more encouraging conversations with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.